So Craig Macadam is Buglife's Director of Conservation, and he's going to be talking to us today about Britain's endemic invertebrates, and in particular, a recent status assessment that Buglife have done about our endemic invertebrates. So Craig, straight over to you.
Thanks, Kieran. I'm just trying to find my unmute there. Thank you for inviting me to talk to you today. It's been a great day so far, and the talks from Claire and Pete have really set the scene for what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about our endemic invertebrates. So these are species that are only found in Great Britain. But first of all, I'm just going to give you a little introduction to Buglife. So Buglife is the only organisation in Europe concerned with the conservation of all invertebrates. Our aim is to halt invertebrate extinctions and achieve sustainable populations of invertebrates in the UK. So basically to recover invertebrate populations. We do this through a number of different methods and ways. We go out there and we inspire people. We get people to understand how amazing invertebrates are and show them, get them up close to invertebrates. And we do practical conservation work, like in this slide here with the peat restoration work that we're doing in central Scotland. This is a group of volunteers putting in a peat dam. We try and shape policy, so we try and influence decision makers by giving them the evidence and then giving them solutions that they could take up. And then we also raise awareness, so like this sort of talk today, but also workshops. We undertake citizen science surveys where we get people to go out and we get surveys done. We also do some surveys of our own work, just in the same way that Pete does we do it on our survey sites. So if we take invertebrates in the UK and look at them as a whole, there's somewhere in the region of about 40,000 species known from the UK. Which vastly outnumbers the other species or bigger species of wildlife in the UK. But what we need to look at, what I'm going to look at today is those species that are only found here. Lots of those species are very widespread. There's 40,000. They're found elsewhere in Europe or in Ireland. I'm going to look at the ones that are only found in Great Britain, so only in Scotland, England, or Wales. Buglife published a report last year, which was the culmination of a project looking at these endemic invertebrates. We had to set some rules when we were doing this, so it only covered. It only covered Great Britain. So only Scotland, Wales and England. The reason for that is because red listing is done on an all-Ireland basis. So rather than take out Northern Ireland and combine it and make it a UK assessment, they use the whole island of Ireland for red listing. So red listing in Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Scotland, Wales and England is done just on a Great Britain basis. We only considered full species, so there are a number of endemic subspecies, but we only considered the full species. Another exercise would be to go through and look at all the endemic subspecies. And we only considered terrestrial and freshwater species, so we didn't look at the marine environment, and that's partly because less is known about the marine environment and the invertebrates that are there, and partly because the data is a bit more disparate. So we went through various lists. There was a list produced in the early 1990s by English Nature. There have been lists produced by Scottish Natural Heritage, now Nature Scot. And there's been other publications that have been produced that have listed a species as endemic, and we compiled all those and we went through them, and we came up with a list of 22 species that were broadly considered to be endemic. And you can see it's quite a wide-ranging list. We've got things from bristletails through the true flies, a flea, a few beetles there, some freshwater stuff, some stoneflies and caddisflies, a single spider, and so on. There was a lot of stuff that didn't get on there, and these were species that were on the list, the long list, if you like, and each of these was researched. So we went back and we looked at literature, we talked to species experts, and basically things were taken off the list, mostly because they were either synonymized with another species, and that made them, instead of just being the species in the UK, they were synonymized perhaps with a species in Europe, and which was more widespread. They'd been found elsewhere in the intervening time from when they were described. So again, that was about looking on things like GBIF, looking for European records, talking to people in Europe about whether these species had been found. And we also had some species that had been recently described, but the author of the description felt that the species would be found elsewhere. So, rather than jumping at doing an endemic red list assessment the minute it's described, we need to give it time to be for that information about that species to be distributed around entomologists, so we can see if it is found elsewhere. So this list here is the species that we looked at, or information that we got. There are probably others that could have a claim to being endemic, but at this point in time, we've concentrated on the 22 species I showed on the previous slide. So what we did was we undertook a red list assessment process for these species, and this is based on the IUCN Red List categories and criteria. And for those of you that don't know about this, this is a internationally agreed standard for understanding the status of species and their risk of extinction. There are a number of categories which you can see on the screen here, ranging from not evaluated, so it's not been put through the system, through to regionally extinct. The ones in the red box, critically endangered, endangered, and vulnerable, are threats categories. The rest of the categories are either near threatened or not threatened. The 3 threat categories are the ones that say that this species is at risk of extinction. The one at the bottom there, data deficient, is where we can't decide whether it could range from being least concern to critically endangered, and we don't have enough information or evidence to put it categorically into one of those groups. If we suspect that it's endangered or threatened, we should look at trying to put it into one of those categories. But if there's a possibility that it could be least concern and not a case for conservation, then, or it could be threatened, then we would have to put it as data deficient. The way that the evaluation goes is that you start and you go through a series of criteria, and then this is the hierarchy of those categories, as I said there. So you can see that we have the ones that are not evaluated, the ones that haven't been put through the system. Not applicable is a special category for species, predominantly non-native species that are present, but they aren't assessed as having an extinction risk in that region. And then so on through to the 3 in the middle there that are the threatened categories. The criteria, it's based on 5 criteria, and species are assessed against all criteria, even if you know that it's probably going to fall into 1 or 2 of them. You have to assess it on all criteria, and the final assessment is based on all of the criteria that it matches. So it may match criteria A and come out as vulnerable under that, but it could come out as critically endangered under one of the other categories. So you would go with the worst category, if you like, the worst category. So the 5 categories are rapid decline. So this is about looking at population decline over a 10-year period. I'm sorry, a 3 a 3-generation period, but in most, or 10 years, whichever is the longer. And in most insects and invertebrates, it's usually the 10-year period. We don't use that one all that often because we don't have the information on the population size and trends. Category B is about a small range, so this is a small distribution, and it's measured on two different types of measure, the extent of the distribution and the area of the distribution. So they're slightly different concepts. The extent is whether it's found in a very tight area or whether it's found from Shetland down to Land's End. And then the area of occupancy is the number of 2 kilometre squares that it's found in. Category C is a small population. So again, we need population data, and that's about number of mature individuals in the population, which is again difficult to do for most invertebrate species. D, there's two elements to D. You can have a small population, again, a very small population, or a small number of locations, and small number of locations is the one that is used most usually for invertebrates. Then the final one is E, which is a quantifiable probability of extinction, and this is where the extinction risk has been modelled in some way. Again, quite difficult to do for most invertebrates. So what we end up with is two main ones that most species qualify under. But as I say, we've got to go through the process to look at them all. And just to give you an insight into the criteria for these two categories, these two criteria. These are the qualifying criteria for critically endangered, and vulnerable species. And you can see they are numerical criteria. They're looking at you assess the species and then you check them against these statements and see which one it matches. The one thing to point out is the term location, which is used in both of these criteria. Now, location has a very specific meaning in the IUCN criteria. It's a geographically or ecologically distinct area in which a single threatening event can rapidly affect all individuals of the taxon. Now, in most cases, you think of locations as being sites, but I'm just going to give you an example of where this comes into its importance. So if we've got a couple of freshwater habitats, we've got a river system with some tributaries, and we've got an unconnected pond, and we've got a species that lives in all those blue bits there, all those habitats. If an invasive species establishes itself here, it is likely to affect that whole area of the river and its tributaries, but it's unlikely to affect the pond because it's not connected. So we have one location there, and one location there, and two locations overall. If, however, it was a pollution incident and somebody put some noxious substance into the river there, it would probably affect that amount of the river, which would give us that one location. The pond is a location, and the two tributaries are a location, and potentially upstream of the pollution incident if the species was present there. So in this case, it would give us 4 locations. So it's not quite as simple as just looking at the number of sites that the species is found on. So what were the results? Well, here are the results for those 22 species. There were around half of the species, so in fact exactly half of the species, 11 of them were threatened with extinction, which is quite shocking. I thought we'd have a couple that might be threatened with extinction, but not half of our endemic species. Interestingly, some of the ones that were associated with freshwaters were less threatened. In fact, most of them were least concern, which was interesting, and it maybe points to freshwaters coping better with some of the stresses and factors affecting them, affecting invertebrates more generally, although I'll come on to an example where that's maybe not the case. One species is extinct, a dance fly that was found at Walton-on-the-Naze, and hasn't been recorded in 100 years, and hasn't been found elsewhere in the world in that time either. There were 4 species listed as critically endangered. 2 species that were critically endangered and possibly extinct, which is something that we can add a caveat to. That was the Caledonian plant hopper, which is only found from the sort of like south of Scotland, has only been found south of Scotland, may turn up again, which is why that possibly extinct is tagged on there. And Ivel sea anemone, which has only been ever found in Widewater Lagoon in Sussex, and hasn't been found for 50 years, 50 odd years. But again, it's a very small cryptic species and may turn up again. So quite a range of species. What I'm going to do for the rest of the presentation is just go through some of them, just to give you some idea about what they are and where they occur. Before I go off the slide, there's 2 species at the bottom there that haven't been evaluated yet, which is Perla calukiana, which is a stonefly that has recently been removed from synonymy with a European species. The British species is considered a separate species, which it was, long when it was first described, it was considered a separate species. It's a really widespread species, and it will probably come out as least concern. And then there's a caddisfly, Rhyocophila septentrionis, which again is the same idea. It's been removed from synonymy. It's only found in Britain. Both of these were results of molecular analysis and looking at barcoding information. And that one, again, is probably going to be least concern as well. Okay, moving on to some of the species. So we start off with the Celtic woodlouse, which is a coastal species. It lives in detritus and debris around the coast. It's blind. It doesn't have any eyes. It's a tiny little woodlouse with little pigment in it, and it's completely restricted to the coast of Wales. That's not been found elsewhere. There's one record, I think, on Anglesey. The rest are on the south coast of Wales. So that's one of the first species. There's a few other myriapods in the list. So there's another one that is found in that area called Anthogona britannica, which is found in a similar sort of area. I think actually this, so I'm just correcting myself, but I think there is one record just inside England of this species. It's near threatened. So if one of those populations was lost for any reason, maybe sea level rise or coastal development, it could be pushed into one of the threatened categories. Another predominantly Welsh species, Chater's bristletail. It's a fairly distinctive species, and we don't often see bristletails. You don't often see bristletails when you're out collecting. This unless you're at the coast. This species is again found in Wales, although there is a species, there's a record from Somerset, and it seems to be spreading into England, so it probably will occur elsewhere as well in the future. It's currently least concerned because like I say, it's spreading and increasing its distribution. The orange-striped stonefly, Polodes mortoni, really widespread species, found in almost any fast-flowing freshwater stream or river. It's not found in the southwest of England because it just isn't the type of habitat it likes, but it's found pretty much everywhere else. And as a result, it's least concern. A dung beetle, Psammoporus insularis. It lives in along the banks of rivers in these sort of like gravelly areas, the shingle and sand. It's got quite a wide extent of occupancy, so it occurs from right up in the Cairngorms on the River Spey, and then down into Wales and into the south of England. And as a result, it doesn't qualify as threatened, it's least concern. So we're on to one of our critically endangered species, the horrid ground weaver, Northophantes horridus. It is only known across the world from 3 limestone quarries in the Plymouth area. I think there's also a little track as well, an old railway track that it's found on as well. It's a small money spider. It has we've had several projects at Buglife surveying for this species, and we've developed quite good survey techniques. John Walters, who's a local entomologist, also helps with that and has taken some great pictures of this species. One of the sites was threatened. The railway track was threatened with a cyclopath. The main site for this species, one of the quarries, seems to be continually threatened with development, whether it's housing or industrial estates or whatever. This is a species that lives in brownfield sites, and these sites, people want to clean them up, they want to redevelop them. But this species completely depends on those sites there in Plymouth. Something a bit different, subterranean shrimp. So the British cave shrimp, Niphagelus glenii. It's one of the oldest known species from Britain. It is work done by the University of Hull has shown that this species hasn't changed in 19 million years. It's found in subterranean water sources, so you find it in caves, you find it in wells, anywhere where groundwater is accessible for sampling. It's only known from the southwest, which is where the ice sheet didn't cover. It's fairly widespread in that area. It is covered by a number of IIISIs. I've forgotten the name of it. Park Pen Hole or Pen Park Hole is one of the IIISIs where it is found, and it's least concern. So another species with a very restricted distribution, Lundy cabbage flea beetle, is only found on the island of Lundy, off the Bristol Channel. It is associated with Lundy cabbage, which is also an endemic plant. So an endemic on an endemic, which and that because of the tight association with the endemic plant, it is only going to be found on Lundy. There is a subspecies which is found elsewhere, but the full species is only found on Lundy. We've just done some surveys. I've still to see the results of the surveys, but it seems to be declining on Lundy, potentially because of loss of the plant, and it was assessed as critically endangered. Another perhaps unusual species to think as a conservation concern, but the Manx Shearwater Flea. This fantastic image from the Natural History Museum collections. This is actually the specimen on the slide that described this species. It's only found on the island of Rum, despite Manx shearwater has been found elsewhere on Skoma and on Lundy. This has only been found on Rum, off the west coast of Scotland. It lives in the burrows of Manx shearwater, so these are some burrows on the Manx shearwater lawns up in the hills on Rum. So it lives within the nesting material. But to be honest, its habitat is actually the Manx shearwater. It's a parasite of the Manx shearwater. Manx shearwaters are declining because of various reasons, but there's avian flu now as well. And that caused its parasite, the flea, to be classified as critically endangered. And Fonseca's seed flies. This one's been in the news quite a bit over the last 5 or 6 years. This is a species of the anthemiid fly, which Botanophylla fonsecae, and it is found only on a short stretch of coast in the north of Scotland. It was first found here at Dornoch Sands back in the 1970s, and surveys since then have found it at a few other places. So this is the map of the area where it's found. The red dot is the type locality. It was described as new to science in 1989, but surveys have been done for it between its discovery and its description. The surveys that have been done they've found it at these points along this coast, so it's about 8 kilometers of coast. The area, sort of the yellowy orange color at the top, is cool links, and this is a extensive area of really natural dune system with extensive dune slacks and accreting dunes. But it's been under threat of a golf course development for since, well, yeah, about 5-6 years ago. The development was turned down after a public inquiry. The Scottish Government turned down the development, but it's come back again, and the public inquiry will be getting held in November again. So Buglife is trying to protect this piece of coast to make sure that we don't lose half the global range of a endemic species. The northern February red stonefly, Buglife's done quite a lot of work on this species. It's only found now in the north of Scotland. It has been recorded on the Usk and the Wye, but it's not been found there for maybe 30-40 years. And we think it's probably extinct in Wales, but it is found in Scotland. When we did the assessment back in 2016, it came out as least concern. Since then, we've got more data, and we've been running a survey for the adults. We get a citizen science survey where we get people to go out during its flight period and look for it on fence posts. And we've seen that it has disappeared from a number of the places where it was originally found. So an example, this is the Cairngorms National Park, where we did a lot of survey effort, and the green dots are where we found it during the survey. The black dots are where it was historically, and the red dots are where it was historically but hasn't been refound. And you can see that on the River Spey, which is to the top of the map here, it's found pretty much from up at the source right the way down through Aviemore and Granton and Spey and down further downstream. Whereas in the River Dee, which is in the middle right of this graph, whilst it's still found up at near its source at Linna Dee, it disappears as you go further downstream. And initially, when we saw this, we thought it must be something to do with the habitat, something that has changed. And the obvious thing is Storm Frank, which came through the area, caused huge devastation in 2015, around about New Year 2015-16. And some of the work that the James Hutton Institute has done, Steve Addy at the James Hutton Institute has done, has shown the level of erosion that has occurred in this part of the river. The graph that's overlaid on the map there, the red peaks going down the way, are where there's erosion, massive erosion happening. The blue on the top is the deposition. And you can see that it pretty much lines up exactly to where we've lost the northern February red stonefly. So just to finish off, just to have a look at some of the threats that were identified during this exercise. The main threats, things like that we kind of know about: water pollution, extreme weather events, floods and droughts. Other ones like dredging and gravel removal and over abstraction. For the dung beetle, loss and damage to the exposed riverine sediments, these gravels and sands. General disturbance to their habitats, and then other things like cliff stabilization. We saw the pictures from Pete about the slumping cliffs. If we stabilize them, then we lose the habitat for those special species. Non-native species, overgrazing, tourist pressure, and recreational pressure. The original site for Fonseca seed fly is next to a caravan park, and there's more and more people there using the dunes and then causing damage to the dune habitat. And things like removal of deadwood. All the assessments are online on the IUCN website. They are available, a lot more information in those assessments. It shows you the distribution detail and a lot about the ecology and where we know about it, the ecology and the habitat requirements of the species. The preparation of the assessments and the report wouldn't have been possible without all these people. The species experts that we consulted about the species to find out what was happening. And Pete's name's there because we talked a lot about crane flies with Pete. And also people at the IUCN who helped with us understanding the assessment process, and people at Natural England like Andy Brown, John Webb, who helped with the list of endemic species that we based it on. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.